So our 24-25 season previews continue on today with the Edmonton Oilers. One of the more talked about teams in the NHL, especially in the last, I would say, 2 or 3 seasons. With this team competing, making it to the Stanley Cup Finals last year, almost completing an impossible comeback in the finals, eventually losing by only 1 goal in Game 7. It's the Edmonton Oilers today. So the Oilers, again, are one of my favorite teams to discuss. Every single Oilers video does very well, and I always have a good time talking about them. So, first off, we have seen this team come from a team that struggled to get into the playoffs, had the decade of darkness, to a consistent cup contender. They have risen up the rankings the last couple of years. Despite facing some struggles, this team is very good. In 21-22, where we'll get started with this was really the first year where they cracked into the playoffs and they really made a lot of damage. They went 49-27-6 for 104 points. They were 11th in the NHL that year. They went on that one run to the Western Conference Finals and lost in a sweep to the Colorado Avalanche. But what the Oilers really learned in that series was how far they can go, how they can play, and that was a very fun run that past year. They were kind of looked at as underdogs in I think every single series they played besides LA. So again, very entertaining, and it continued into 22-23 where the team went 50-23-9 for 109 points. They were 6th in the NHL, and they lost in the second round to the Vegas Golden Knights. After that series, there was a lot of questions that were drawn about the goaltending and the defense that are still questions that we talk about today. When you look in terms of overall with this team, what are your biggest questions, your blue line, and your goaltending? That was really when it shined in that 22-23 season. Now in 23-24, this was a storybook year for the Oilers, and it stinks that they couldn't wrap it up with a Stanley Cup, because if they did, this would have been one of those generational stories that you would be talking about for a long time. I even still think that with what it turned out to be, you're going to be talking about it for a long time. They went 49-27-6 for 104 points. They had 9th in the NHL that year, and they were last in November. They were like 2-9 at one point. It was brutal, but then they bring in a new coach. They start to win a lot of games, and by a lot, I mean 16 straight, and they went on to finish just behind Vancouver. They weren't that far behind them, to be honest. Had they not had that rough start, I think they honestly probably would have been ahead of Vancouver, just being honest with you. But they get into the playoffs. They beat LA. They beat the Canucks. They beat the Stars. They make an impossible 0-3 comeback against the Florida Panthers. And they do eventually end up losing in Game 7, but still, it was a run that was absolutely incredible when you look in terms of what went down. Like, we haven't seen something like that happen in over 60, 70 years. It's been a very long time since we've seen a team do what Edmonton nearly did. So, it's impressive. Now, this offseason, they made a lot of moves. They moved out a lot of guys, brought in a lot of guys, and the list was very long. So, we'll start with your departures. You got Warren Foegele, Ryan McLeod, Sam Carrick, Sam Gagner, Jack Campbell, Desharnais, Cody Ceci, Philip Broberg, and Dylan Holloway. So again, a lot of those guys are fairly recent, like Broberg, Holloway, and Ceci. We talked about them as early as like a few days ago. So yeah, those are very recent news. I don't really need to go into those that much. They lose Foegele. I've always liked Foegele, a good physical, always worked hard, a good forward. They unfortunately lost him. McLeod as well, good fourth line guy. Obviously, he's off to Buffalo. Guys like Carrick, Gagner were kind of just depth players who filled in at points. Jack Campbell, they bought out the contract. I guess that's good. They wanted some of that cap flexibility, but down the road it could bite them in the butt. And then Desharnais was also a third pairing or depth defender with the Oilers as well. When you look in terms of the guys they brought in, I think Jeff Jackson, and specifically Jeff Jackson, has made very good moves. They brought in Jeff Skinner, Victor Arvidsson, Matthew Savoy, Josh Brown, Connor Carrick, Ty Emberson, and Vasily Podkolzin. So we'll start with Emberson and Podkolzin. Those two were moves from the Stan Bowman regime that's currently in right now. I don't know if I necessarily agree with those being the replacements of Broberg and Holloway. Again, we'll get into it in a little bit, but we'll save that for later on. Savoy, great move, terrific trade. You get him back in return. He is definitely, I would say, a top 30 or 40 prospect, depending on how you view him. He's definitely going to be exciting. He could make the team out of camp as well. Arvidsson and Skinner, great pickups. Those guys will fit in well in your top 6 immediately. And those are guys that you give the puck to, they're scoring. So let's say Skinner's playing with McDavid. He could put up a 40-goal year. Just saying. The way McDavid can move the puck, the way McDavid can pass, he could put up a 40-goal season or a 40-assist season, depending on how you want to look at it. McDavid could just choose, I'm going to score, or say, I'm going to pass a little bit more this season. Honestly, that's what McDavid's been doing. He can just choose between whatever he wants to do. He can score or he can pass. He's just awesome like that. And same with Arvidsson, too. So, again, great pickups. The Josh Brown was a little bit of a head-scratcher, but, again, he's probably going to be in your blue line now, unless if, you look at it a different way. But when you look at this team's projected lineups, offensively, they look terrific. Your top 6 is Ryan Nugent-Hopkins, Connor McDavid, Zach Hyman. Then you got Jeff Skinner, Leon Draisaitl, and Victor Arvidsson. So, again, I already said Arvidsson and Draisaitl, and that Skinner line. Again, I don't even really need to go into depth here. All of these guys, we know what they can do. They are proven NHLers. McDavid, best player in the league. Hyman put up a 50, 60-goal season last year. He was incredible. I do think that it's possible we see Hyman regress a little bit. Not saying that he will be bad next year, but I think that you see a guy like that pop off with a season like he did, it wouldn't be surprised if he kind of just took a step back. I'm just saying. I wouldn't rule it out, to be honest with you. Apart from that, great top 6. There's really no doubt about it. Your bottom 6 and some extra depth. You got Evander Kane, which does have a question mark next to him because if Kane, there's a chance that Kane will play on LTIR. We'll see, but if he's healthy, he'd be a third-line winger. Adam Henrique and Connor Brown as well, and then Matthias Janmark, Derek Ryan, and Corey Perry. And for some extra guys, you have Podkolzin, Savoy, and James Hamblin. So, again, bottom 6, relatively the same as it was in the playoffs, and it worked well in the playoffs, I thought. I thought a lot of those guys were good in their own unique roles. Janmark was scored in Game 7. Was great as well. I think that, honestly, the bottom 6, you didn't even really need to change much. I guess besides Fogle and McLeod departing, I think this bottom 6 looks pretty solid. And then, again, there's the wild cards of Podkolzin, Savoy, and Hamlin. Can one of those younger players make it into the lineup this year? It's one of the things that you got to think about. So we'll see what happens there with those Oilers in those depth roles. But again, forward core's great. Defense is where I'm like, I don't know. So first pairing, Ekholm, Bouchard, great. Second pairing, Nurse and Emberson. And then third pairing, Kulak and Stetcher. So, and then you got Connor Carrick as your extra. So, what I would imagine what they're going to do, and those are Hockey News' projected lines, not my projected lines, by the way. What I would imagine they're going to do is they're probably going to move Kulak up to the second pairing with Nurse, is what I would think would happen. Because if Nurse is playing with Emberson, oh boy, watch out. But regardless, it's still either way not ideal. Losing Broberg really hurts this team. Because I thought even though Broberg, it's a small sample size, I'm taking him over Ty Emberson or Brett Kulak 100%. Although I do think Kulak is a good defenseman. A lot of those other guys are kind of just unproven. Stetcher is a good depth defenseman, but she shouldn't really be a regular on a team like the Oilers. And Emberson was an AHLer for most of his career. So that's a concern that I do have as well. And then Josh Brown's your other defenseman that I guess you could filter in here. He's not that good either. So it's really, on the blue line, a lot of head scratchers, and your goalie tandem is Skinner and Pickard, which is nice and all, but a goalie like Skinner, unless he takes a huge step this year, I thought he was terrific in the playoffs. I think he's a good goalie, but he's not a great goalie. He's not a goalie like in the tier of Bobrovsky or Ottinger or Swayman. He's a tier below those guys, essentially. And honestly, yeah, he's a good goalie, but unless he takes that step, yeah, you're going to have to rely on your offense a lot to kind of win you games, to be honest. Because I don't know if I'm trusting that blue line outside of that first pairing. That's one of the doubts that I do have. But I do think that Knobloch knows what he's going to do, knows how to coach. He does a good job with that. Bowman kind of just has to kick his feet up, more or less. and kind of just watch this go on, because honestly, he doesn't need to do a lot. Most of this core is already put together, and that's why there were a lot of people who criticized it with Bowman. But chances are this team will be back in it, will be back in the playoffs for that Stanley Cup. We'll see if they make it back to the final, but they will be competing for sure. A team with Draisaitl and McDavid is definitely going to have to compete absolutely 100%. And again, there is some questions in regards to McDavid, Draisaitl, and Evan Bouchard on what their contracts are going to look like, if they're going to sign. That's another big thing you got to look at as well. So, when you look at the Hockey News' yearbook and fantasy guide, it has the cup odds for the Oilers at 11-1. It has the Oilers finishing first in the Pacific. And the biggest X factor facing this Oilers team right now is that there's no doubt the organization and its fans are hungry for a championship. And while we've seen NHL teams learn to win, the pressure will ratchet up higher than ever this year. Looming over it all, the nagging distraction of a Draisaitl and or McDavid inching closer to free agency. So again, as I just said, those are definitely things that you got to keep in mind as well. So we'll definitely see what happens there with the Oilers and what they will do this coming season. But again, I'm really excited. Again, I like talking about the Oilers. I like covering the Oilers. They're one of my favorite teams to talk about in the NHL overall. And I'm looking forward to possibly another deep run in this year's playoffs. Let me know your thoughts in the comment section down below on the Edmonton Oilers. Thank you all for watching. If you enjoyed, make sure to subscribe down below. I really appreciate it. Next up, we are doing the Florida Panthers, so the other team that was in the finals and the one that actually won the Stanley Cup. So thanks for watching, and I will see you guys in the next video. Adios.